Hey everyone, it's Ken with Ken's Creations. Well, in this video, I want to show you a comparison of the Silhouette Cameo and the Cricut Explorer with the new print and cut technology. Now, the Silhouette Cameos had the print and cut technology for quite some time. In fact, that's the reason I bought that machine a couple years ago, was because of this technology. The Cricut Explorer has just introduced this technology. So I want to go ahead and do a video comparing both of these machines and what the results look like on the print and cut. So we're going to be taking the Cricut Explorer here and the Silhouette Cameo and putting them head to head. I'm going to be using SVG files from a third party, so that way it is a fair comparison between the both machines. I didn't want to take any images out of the Silhouette online store, and I didn't want to take any Cricut images and try to compare both of those because I thought that was an unfair advantage. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and compare both machines. We're going to look at the process of how to import and get your files ready for print and cut. And then of course we're going to take a look at the cut images, and you can decide which one you think is better between the Silhouette Cameo and the Cricut Explorer. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll go ahead and start with the Silhouette Cameo and getting your image ready for print and cut. So the first one we're going to go ahead and take a look at is the Silhouette Cameo. I'm going to be using a file from a third party called House of Balloons. So we got to go ahead and import that into our Silhouette Studio. So we're just going to go up to File. We're going to go into Import, Import to Library, and it's going to bring up your dialog box. And I'm actually, it goes to my desktop where I save most of my files. And I'm actually going to be working with PNG, which in my opinion is the best files to work for with print then cut. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that one. That's going to import it into my own designs. So it always goes into my own designs. So once it is there, I can go ahead and double click on my own designs. And let's go ahead and bring that into our mat. Now we have the image on our mat. But however, if I was to just go to my cut lines and just show you what it's going to cut, there is no cut lines because we actually in Silhouette Studio have to do all of the work to get this ready for print then cut. And I'm going to show you how to do that. It's all in tracing. Silhouette Studio, you actually have to trace it and do some messing with thresholds and get it just right. So in your trace window, which is this up here, there's these little boxes. There's a little butterfly in there. You have select trace area. You have trace, which will trace your entire image, including all of these little gaps, which was what we want. Trace outer edge, which will just trace your outer edge. And then trace and detach. And that one I use a lot if I'm actually tracing something and I'm trying to detach it from the background. You have high pass filter, low pass filter, threshold, and scale. This is where people get really confused on Silhouette Studio tracing is, you know, do I turn my high pass filter up, my low pass filter up, threshold, scale? It can be really confusing. However, this is what I do. I'm going to go ahead and select trace area. And I'm going to go ahead and just draw a box around that. Now, as you can see, it filled it with this kind of yellowy look here. And what we need to do is we need to fill in all of the area we want it to trace. So we want it to trace all of in these tiny areas. I want it to cut out in those. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn my high pass filter off, and you're going to see some of the balloons fill with yellow. So we have to turn threshold up until everything is filled with yellow, including these tiny little lines. So I'm going to keep turning up my threshold. There we go. And the thing on Silhouette is it's kind of trial and error because the higher your threshold is working from the outside, or excuse me, the inside out. So if you notice, if I turn down my threshold, it's going to kind of start coming a little, it's going to start creeping onto the inside. And the more I turn that down, you're going to see it kind of, see, there you go. See, it's getting a little thinner in the lines. So the problem I don't like with Silhouette is it's trial and error to make sure what you want. So I'm at 100%. I'm going to turn my scale down a little bit here. And I think that looks pretty good because we don't want to go too low because of these little lines. I want to make sure it cuts those lines. Once you get it to the point you like, you can actually hit trace. Now it's going to put all these yellow lines. Now, as you can see, I got tiny little red lines in there, so I'm going to hit back because I don't want those. I don't want to mess with that. So I'm going to turn my threshold once again up until all of this is full of yellow. which is probably going to be at 100%, which, yep, that is the case. So now that we have that scale turned down, I'm going to hit trace. And the reason I'm doing trace instead of trace outer edge is I wanted to trace on the inside here. So I want it to get inside of all these balloons. Now, the next step we have to do is, because I did all these traces, it traced everything. I don't want it to cut, because right now if I was to hit cut, it's going to cut in here, it's going to cut in here, it's going to cut in here, and I don't want it. It also has some here. So I'm going to move my image out of the way, and I'm going to go ahead and click this and hit release compound path. And now I can get rid of, by hitting the delete button, I can get rid of the images I don't want to cut. So the Silhouette Studio, as you can see, it's all you doing the tracing. You are in complete control of this image, and you have to do the cleaning up. It also has this tiny little one there I don't want. There, and that looks pretty good. And then we have to move this image back and kind of center it here to make sure we got it good. There we go. And that looks pretty good. So now I can draw a box around it and go ahead and group these items so that way if I need to, I can resize it. Now I've traced it. We have our red cut lines. So now we can actually size it. So let's go ahead and size these today at a height of 5 inches. All right. So now we need to set up our page for the Silhouette to do its print then cut. So we basically have to say that this is print then cut. And the way you're going to do that is by going up here to this little window, which is the registration marks. You're going to say that you are a Cameo portrait, because that's what I'm using. There's my registration marks, but I print on 8.5 by 11 paper. So now I have to go to this window, which is my paper window, and tell it it is a letter paper. And now I'm set up with my registration marks. So by doing that, I've added my registration marks, I have my trace line, and now I'm actually able to position this wherever I want. And now I can go to make sure my cuts look good. So I'm at cut, because I want it to cut everything. I don't want it to just cut the outer edge. So zoom in here. Okay, so now we are ready to print this. We can go ahead and group this, and now we are ready to print and then cut this. So I can actually come up here. Now this is a two-step process too. So you need to go ahead and hit this printer icon up here, send to printer. It's gonna bring up your printer dialog box. I always change my printer settings and say that even though I'm not printing on glossy paper or photo paper, I choose that so I can get a nice photo print. It prints it at a higher quality. And now I can hit print. That's going to print to my Epson, and then we can go ahead and get this feeded into the Silhouette. So as you can see, many steps to get your trace file. You have to import the image, you have to trace it, you have to clean up your trace, you have to mess around with the threshold and all that good jazz. Then you have to set up your mat. So you have to change your registration marks, then you have to change it to the printer size, and then you can print, and then you can cut. So let's go ahead and get this printed out and cut it and see what the results look like. Okay, so we have it all printed out. I'm gonna go ahead and send it to the Silhouette. The Silhouette is gonna go ahead and look for the registration marks. Now, one thing to note is every once in a while, I have had the Silhouette not find the registration marks and have had to use a flashlight to find the registration marks. But I mean, it usually finds them without that. Once it found the registration marks, it should start cutting. Okay, so the image is done. I'm gonna go ahead and unload it, and then we can clean up the image and see how we did. So here is the Silhouette Cameo on the House of Balloons file. It did a pretty good job. I'm really particular on my white though. So as you can see around some of the balloons, there is a faint white edge. Now I could probably mess around with my threshold to try to get that a little bit better and do some manipulating and retry cutting and printing and stuff to try to fix that. There's a little white above the house here, which I'm not too wild about. So not a bad cut, it's just a little bit of white. Did a really good job cutting my little strings here, and it did a pretty good job cutting all of these little areas right here since I traced it that way. But once again, I'm not huge on how much white is showing around the balloons. So let's go ahead and now do the same process on the Cricut Explorer. I want to show you the difference on importing images into the Cricut Explorer and how much of an easier process it is on the Cricut Explorer. It's a 3-step process, so I'll show you how to import it, and then we'll go ahead and do the print then cut on that and see what the difference is between the two houses. So let's show you the same process using Cricut Design Space for the Cricut Explorer. Now the first thing we need to do is upload the image, which is right here. And in order to upload it, it is a basic upload, which is your JPEG, your PNG, your GIF, and your BMP, which are most designers give you. And in my particular case, I like PNG files. PNG files have no background, so there's much less cleanup. So that's what we're going to start with. This is how you get a file ready for print then cut. So it's essentially kind of like the tracing in Silhouette Studio. However, it's not tracing because they don't use a trace option in Cricut Design Space. So there's my PNG file. It shows up right there. It's a complex image. I continue to step 3. I'm going to look at my cut lines just to make sure that it did get inside those balloons, which it did. Look at that. Beautiful. I hit continue to step 3. Now it shows the red lines around everything. Preserve original image with shape, recommended for printing, which we want. If I turn that off, you're not going to see your image, but it will show you your cut lines again. So if you want to take another look at your cut lines, you could do that. But we want to leave that on because we want our house, and we're going to hit save image. That's it. 3 steps to get your file ready for print then cut. Huge. So now let's say you wanted to just do the outer edge of this. Kind of like I showed you in Silhouette Studio, you have the option of just tracing outer edge or tracing everything. You can do that by doing basic upload. And if you do a JPEG file versus a PNG file, that's how you can do that. Because the JPEG file is going to let you clean up the areas that you want. So for example, it comes with that white background. I can use this here and just clean up around here. And then it will keep inside those balloons. And then that way you just have your outer edge. I don't know why you'd want that, but if you do, you have that option. So now that I have my file ready, I can go ahead and hit insert image. And there it is. It's ready to go. I can size it. And we did that other one at 5 inches. So I'm going to do 5 inches. It automatically does it. Now, this Cricut Design Space already knows this is the print option. You have your little printer here. So it basically is telling the Explorer, this is a print then cut file. We are ready to go. What's nice about that is when I hit go, the system does everything for you. Unlike Silhouette Studio, where you had to go and change your mat, you had to go and change your paper size, and then you have to add your registration marks. The nice thing in Design Space is as long as you show that little printer icon here, it knows it's a print then cut file. And since it's a print then cut file, it automatically adjusts your paper size to 8.5 by 11, and it automatically adds those registration marks, which is absolutely amazing. I don't have to go through any other steps to do anything. The system automatically does it. Now there's one last thing I want to show you. In Design Space, they have the settings option, and you have what's called a bleed option. The bleed option automatically presets, and the bleed option gives you kind of what's called a buffer room around your image to eliminate those extra white lines that you might get. So on my Silhouette Studio, or my Silhouette image on the House of Balloons, you saw I got a little bit of white around the image. Now, if I turn this bleed off, you're going to see my image gets a little skinnier, and it will tell you, we recommend you keep bleed on for optimal print then cut results. So I'm going to go ahead and keep my bleed on, and I will also show you one with the bleed off so we can take a look at that. But let's do the one with the bleed off, and then I'll show you how it goes, and then we'll do one with the bleed off. So I'm going to hit print and continue. The system automatically comes up with your printer icon here. Now you can print using, I'm in Google Chrome, you can print using Google, but I like to print using my system dialog box by clicking that option, and that brings up my Apple one. Once again, the reason why is I like to go into my print settings and change it to a photo paper, even though I'm using regular paper, because it's going to give me a photo print quality, which is a higher print quality. And I like that setting better. And I think you can do it on any premium setting. But if I go to plain white, you can actually go to economy or fine. But I think the best one, in my personal opinion, is photo. Then I'm going to hit print. My system is going to go ahead and print that out, and we will be able to print and cut this. So I'm going to go ahead and let that print. Make sure my Cricut Explorer machine is on here. That might be nice. And then we'll go ahead and show you the results. So as you can see here, which is nice, it has a little light to read the registration marks, which is a really nice feature that the other machines don't have. And I've been able to pick the registration marks up in dark rooms, in all types of light. So I really like that. So let's go ahead and have it read its registration marks, do its cut, and then we'll compare it. Now this is the one with the bleed, so that's why it looks a little funny. I will then also do one without the bleed so we can compare that one just to be fair to the silhouette. All right. All right, so we can see the difference here. Here is the Cricut image right here. And let me see if I can get that to lay flat. If you see it side by side, there is no white anywhere on any of these balloons. The other thing you can see here is, and this goes back to one of my first videos I did, just how much of a finer cut in between these balloons it is. And that's what's nice about using the Cricut Explorer now, is it's got I believe a better cut quality. So it's getting in there closer to those balloons. So you can see right there, primarily, look at that there and that there. So that's what's nice about the Cricut Explorer, is look at that. There's no white because of that bleed, and the cut quality is just superb in my opinion. So I think the results speak for themselves on the comparison of the print and cut on that. Now I do want to do one without the bleed, because I already know there's people out there saying, well, it's not fair that this one has the bleed and that one doesn't. So let's go ahead and do that now, and then I can show you what that one looks like without the bleed. So here is the Cricut without the bleed, and as you can see, it did a really good job still. There's no white along the house, the balloons. One other thing that I wanted to mention between the Silhouette and the Cricut is the difference in, once again, I know this is more print than cut, but the difference in the cutting here. As you can see, just little tiny differences, the cleaner cuts in between that red, green, and yellow balloon compared to over here. Over here, there is supposed to be a little bit of a cut here. The Silhouette missed that, it got it over here. So I do want to show you that even though we're reviewing print and cut, because the cutting is better with the Cricut, it does a better job with the print and cut. It gets those minor details, which for me on a print and cut is very important. As you can tell, just going back over here on this Cricut without the bleed, it did an amazing job. Once again, look at that. No white. If there is any white, it's just a very barely amount of white, which could also be a calibration error. I could go back and recalibrate my machine. So the Cricut without bleed did a fantastic job compared to the Cricut bleed. Now, in my personal opinion, if I have this bleed option, why wouldn't I use it? Because it just gives you an amazing result here. So what I want to show you now is some comparisons. I'm not going to show you the machine's cutting, but I'm going to do a whole bunch of different cuts and just show you the comparison of the Silhouette versus the Cricut, and show you the difference in some various different cuts. So I went ahead and did a whole bunch of different cuts using both the Silhouette Cameo and the Cricut Explorer. The one thing I wanted to point out, it took me triple the time to get my files ready in the Silhouette software, because the amount of tracing I had to do, releasing the compound path, getting rid of the pieces I didn't want, whereas the Cricut Explorer was a 3-step process. You import, you clean up the image, then you save it. So for comparison reasons, the Cricut Explorer is much easier on getting your files ready for the print and cut. So I just wanted to point that out. But let's take a look at the results. So we've already showed you this one here of the House of Balloons. You have your silhouette over here. Cricut with the bleed, Cricut without the bleed. So let's go to the next one here. The next one I did was this Noah's Ark. Here is the Silhouette Cameo. Here is the Cricut Explorer. As you can see, there is just a little bit of white all around the Silhouette Cameo. I did go back and try this another time. This is my actual second cut because I tried working with the threshold to get my threshold to come in a little bit tighter. But when I did that, it cut off down here. So I was missing a little bit of the wave and the boat. So I did try to manipulate this a little bit in the software to get a better one. I guess my point is on the Cricut Explorer, I didn't have to do any manipulation. Because it was a PNG file, when I imported it, it automatically cut out all of these spots for me. I didn't have to worry about it. Look at that, even in that little tiny elephant in there, and there's a tiny little spot. You can't see it over here, right here, but in between the bear. And the thing that I liked about it is the fact that I didn't have to do anything. The design space automatically had all of these automatically cut out because it was a PNG file. And as you can see, there is no white. Now, I did not use a bleed on this. If I had used a bleed, you would have seen a little bit of a darker edge along these. And you can kind of see just a smidgen of white right there and there. So this is without the bleed. So you can just see how pristine their cuts are. The next one I did was this bear file. The reason I chose this file is the spokes. The spokes are very detailed, they're black, and I wanted to see how, first of all, the print and cut did, but I also wanted to see how well it cut those spokes. On the top here you have the Silhouette Cameo. I was pretty disappointed, tons of white. Once again, I went back in and messed with my threshold. I spent probably a good half hour trying to get this perfect where I didn't have white. I just reiterate once again the amount that I had to do because I had to release the compound path on here because when I traced this, it traced anything white. So if you see any of this white on the bears, the shoes, it wanted to trace that and then wanted me to cut that. So I had to release the compound path. I had to go in and say, no, I don't want you to cut that. I had to manipulate the software. So you have to go in there and tell it all of this stuff. Down here, this is just a cutting issue, not more of a print, but it did cut this spoke here just because these spokes are very dainty. But you can see just the amount of white along the edges. So that is the Cameo. On the bottom is the Cricut Explorer. Now, I did use the bleed option on here, so I will point that out, but it is pristine. There is no white. The spokes are absolutely amazing. And that's the reason I did use the bleed on this one is because I knew with these spokes being as dainty as they were, I didn't want to get any white because, I mean, it was inevitable. But you can see with this bleed, it is just an amazing cut. Just absolutely look at that. So you can see the difference here. Once again, Silhouette Cameo with the amount of white along it compared to the Cricut Explorer, which it's just amazing. This one here probably took me 20 minutes to import, clean up, trace, get my paper settings, where the Cricut Explorer literally took me, and I am not joking, probably a minute. It's a 3-step process. You import it, you clean it up, you save it. So huge difference in time in getting these files ready. For my last one I wanted to show you is this zombie file. And the reason I chose this was the amount of black on it. I am very, very particular on my white, especially with black. Some colors can mask the white around it if there's a little bit of white, but black is very hard. The top is the Silhouette Cameo. The bottom is the Cricut Explorer. The other reason I chose this file is the amount of curve it had around here. Now, this one here was not fun in the Silhouette. The reason why is when I imported this into the Silhouette, it has a hard time when you're tracing something on white. It thinks that it's part of the background, so it wants to get rid of it. So I had to go in here and make sure that it did not get rid of all of these ghosts. I had to go in and say, no, I want to keep those, don't get rid of it. So I had to go in there and clean this up. This one took me forever in that software to get it ready. And as you can tell, just with the cutting, there's tons of white around it. And I did go back in and mess with the threshold. I brought the threshold in. So this threshold was almost at 98.2%. Anything more than that, it was losing my ghost completely. It wouldn't even recognize them because of the white. Down below though, as you can see, this is the Cricut Explorer. Once again, because this was a PNG file, I didn't have to do anything. I imported the file, it already knew it was a PNG, so it already had all of these spots ready cut out for me. So I didn't have to go in and do anything. I just, step 1, import, step 2, looked at my cut lines. They were perfect, save. So much, much easier process to import it. And as you can see, the results were phenomenal. I did use the bleed line on here just because of being black. I was afraid of white. The white you are seeing is from the edge of the papers because it is printed on white cardstock. But as you can tell, if you look at the gate compared to the gate up here, just huge difference. Even on the zombie here in between the legs, it didn't get it on here. It got it right here. It's just night and day. This was my favorite comparison just because of how detailed in between the trees it was, in between your little fence here, and just the amount of white that was on the Silhouette Cameo. So I was really impressed with the Cricut Explorer. So as you can see, the Cricut Explorer does an amazing job with the print then cut. I've been thoroughly impressed with the bleed and with the bleed off. So I did test that, and I wanted to show you, even with that bleed off, it does some amazing results. The last thing I wanted to show you is the big difference in the amount of print then cut images that Silhouette Studio offers versus the Cricut. And I want to show you also, if you have an image that doesn't or is not ready for print then cut in Silhouette, how many steps it takes you to get that ready, just so you can see the difference. So let's take a look at that. So the last thing I wanted to show you is the difference in the amount of images already ready to go for print then cut on the Silhouette versus the Explorer. Now, if you go to the Silhouette online store, you're going to see that currently they have 58,032 designs that are ready for download. However, how many of those are ready to go for print then cut? Now, you know it's a print then cut file because it will have a little P here next to it. And that means it's ready to go. Everything's been done for you to print then cut. Now, if I look at these designs of the 58,000 designs, if I just look at print then cut, it drops down to 3,419 designs that are currently in the Silhouette online store for print then cut. Now, compared to Cricut, which when we look at the Cricut online store, they currently have 42,172 images in their store currently. And every single one of them is ready for print then cut. This is a huge difference in my opinion. And the reason why is when Cricut uploaded their images, they uploaded them in full color, knowing that they wanted them to be print then cut. So for example, if I look at this monkey, in 3 easy steps, I make this print then cut. I select him, I go and flatten him, which means I'm flattening it for print then cut, then I hit go. That's it. That's with every single Cricut image in their library, you can print then cut. Even the licensed images, Disney, Hello Kitty, all of those images, print then cut. Now, in the Silhouette Studio, you have your print then cut that will do that. So you actually have some print then cuts that you can actually just click and they come in and you just hit go. Perfect. However, if you want to change a regular image for print then cut, let's take a look at this bear. He comes in all of these pieces. So what you have to do to get this ready is you first have to ungroup them. You have to go to each piece and color it into whatever colors you want it. So let's say I want to do these different colors. This is, let's say, black. And then I move this guy on here. And then I think that's his nose. So let's do this. Maybe. And then like that. So I have to go through and color every single one of these pieces to get it ready for print then cut. Then I have to group it. That's a lot of work. It's a much larger process than it is with the Cricut design space. So I think that's good to note that if you're looking at being able to use all of your, especially if you have Cricut images and you want to use them, this, in my opinion, is a much easier process. Look at, I'm still working on this. I'm getting kind of bored. There we go. I think that goes there. Now, obviously, my colors are completely, he looks like a deranged bear, but you get the idea. So there you go. Then I would have to group it, and now it's ready for print then cut. Well, not really, because I still have to go change my registration mark, so Cameo. Then I have to change my paper because I print on 8.5 by 11. Now I'm ready for print then cut. That is the ugliest looking bear I've ever seen. But anyways, you get the idea. So now I'm ready for print then cut. So you can see the amount of steps it's going to take to get a regular image for print then cut versus, here you go, Cricut Design Space, 3 steps. So to each his own. I know there's a lot of people that use the Silhouette that love the fact that going through those steps, they can do a whole bunch of different things with it. For me, I like simplicity. I like the fact that I can literally go into Cricut's library and do any single image as print then cut, and I don't have to do anything. And I could still go through and change all the colors if I wanted to, just like I could in Silhouette Studio. So you still have those options. So I did want to show you that quick difference in how many steps it does take. Where Silhouette Studio, you're looking at a 5 to 6 steps process. With Design Space, you're looking at a 3-step process, and it's much easier in my opinion. So let's go ahead and go to my final thoughts. So everyone, that is the comparison of the Silhouette Cameo versus the Cricut Explorer with the print then cut. A couple things I wanted to point out. A lot of people have already reached out to me saying that you can do a bleed on the Silhouette Cameo. However, you cannot do a dynamic bleed. And the difference is a bleed, you can absolutely do an offset behind any of the images and match it to one of the colors to slightly get rid of any kind of extra white lines. However, on the Cricut Explorer, they have a dynamic bleed, which is actually mimicking multiple colors around your image. So this is important to note for those that are already saying, well, you can do a bleed in the Silhouette Cameo by doing an offset. The other thing I wanted to note is the simplicity of the Cricut Explorer over the Silhouette. The Cricut Explorer is a 3-step process where you import your file, clean it up, and save it. The Silhouette, I have always said it is a tougher process. That's probably the #1 question I get on my YouTube channel is how to trace in Silhouette without throwing my Cameo out the window. And you can do it. And once you get that process down the Silhouette, it's very easy. It's just a lot of trial and error, moving your threshold all around scale. So I will say the Cricut Explorer and Design Space is much easier on the process of getting your files ready for print then cut. And then actually as the results, as you can see, in my opinion, the Cricut Explorer just did a much better job with print then cut, both with the dynamic bleed and without the dynamic bleed. So once again, here is that balloon house that has all of them. You can see on the Noah's Ark, without the dynamic bleed, it did still a phenomenal job. So that's without that bleed. For those people that are saying, well, it's not a fair advantage to have this with the bleed without, this one does not have a bleed, and look at how much of a better job it did than the Cameo. Once again, you got these two here, that is just amazing, and then of course the zombies. So I can't express enough. A lot of people in the Silhouette Cameo will say, well, you have more options, you can do a lot more, you can, trace and detach, you can do many more options with it. I've never used a lot of those options. However, for me, the process on the Cricut Explorer was much easier, much less frustrating, and I will probably tend to reach to my Cricut Explorer in the future when I want to do print then cut. So hopefully this gives you guys some ideas on what one would work best for you in your craft room. Make sure you guys are checking out my blog for more information on both these machines. You can find that over at www.creativeken.blogspot.com. Make sure you're checking out this YouTube page and subscribing to it so you can see all of my videos on both the Silhouette Cameo and the Cricut Explorer. Make sure you're following my Facebook page, my Twitter page, my Instagram page. Also, make sure to check out my Close to My Heart website where you can find all my Close to My Heart product and support Ken's creations. All right, guys, thanks for checking out today's video. I hope this gave you some insight which one to go with, especially if you're doing a lot of projects with print then cut. This hopefully gave you an idea of which one would be a better fit for you. So thanks for taking a look at it today, and I hope to see you guys soon. And make sure, go down in your room, whatever machine you use, and go out there and create something magical.